Hey everybody, Tim from Tadabase here, and this is Build It with Tim. In addition to the numerous other security features that Tadabase has to offer, if you really want to lock down your application, I'm going to show you how you can enable and use IP security inside of your app. IP security is located in your app's settings under App Security Settings. All you need to do is simply just enable IP security, and then you can choose whether or not you want to allow a list of IPs or block a list of IPs. If you choose to block any IP addresses, you can then enable a custom message that will be shown when this particular user tries to access your application. So if I enter my IP address here and then I go over to our published application and try to refresh this page, you're going to see that I'm locked out. Now, one of the cool things that we can do with IP security, as far as the custom message is concerned, we can use the IP address that's currently being captured by the system, and we can use that as a variable. So we can switch this message to say open bracket, IP, close bracket is not authorized to view this page. Once again, when I refresh, you're going to see it will actually display that IP address at the top inside of our custom message. Now, one of the other cool things that you can do inside of this IP security setting here is we can block IPs or allow IPs using CIDR blocks. Simply put, it's a way to group a bunch of IP addresses together so that you can block or allow multiple at once. Now, there's a specific CIDR notation that you need to use in order to identify these blocks of IP addresses. And there's some calculators or generators out on the internet that you are free to use where you can simply just input the range of IP addresses that you want to block or allow, and it will generate those block notations for you. Now, for this example, let's say we wanted to block everywhere from 169.150 to 180 all the way to 100. To do that, we can simply just do 0/24. This is the CIDR notation that will block anything within that particular range. Going back to my published application, once again, I refresh the page and I am not authorized. Simply switching this over to only allow these IPs will mean that when I go back to my page and refresh, I can now view the app. Now, that's all fine and good, but this wouldn't be a Build It with Tim video if we didn't take it a little bit further. We can do more with IP addresses and locking down parts of an application using Tadabase plugins, validation rules, and the Tadabase REST API. So for this little demo, what we're going to do is we're going to pretend that this form on the right side of the page, we want to lock down by IP address. So users can view the page. However, if they want to fill out this form, then their IP has to be whitelisted. We're going to do that by adding a text field into the form where we can capture the IP address. Then we're going to use that to look up into another table and validate whether or not that IP address is currently marked as active or inactive, which would be, either whitelisted or blacklisted. There's a couple pieces of setup that we need to do first. The first thing we need to do is go back to our data builder, and we are going to create a new table called IP addresses, and we are going to store the IP addresses here. You can see I've stored my own, and I've currently marked it with a radio field as inactive. The next thing I'm going to do is go into the data table in which the form is going to submit to. So in this case, the sample data table, and I've added a text field called IP address. This is where we're going to capture the IP address of the user who's currently on the page. Next, we're going to be using the Tadabase REST API pipe inside of the form component. Before we install that pipe, we need to jump back to our app settings, click API keys, and generate a new API key so that we can use it with the REST API pipe. Inside the pipe section of our application, we'll simply click on the REST API pipe and click install. We can select our API key that we just generated, and for now, we are good to go. To finish the configuration of the REST API pipe, we're going to go into our API calls menu here, and we're going to choose filter by a single field. The way this is going to work is that when we submit the form or try to submit the form, we are going to go look in the IP address table, filter for records by IP address that matches the captured IP address of the user who's trying to submit the form, and then we will check whether or not it's currently active or inactive. So after opening up this particular request, we will navigate to parameters, and then we will configure the table that we want to search in. and the field that we want to search by. So in this case, it's going to be the IP address table, and we're going to search by the IP address field. Now, in order to test this and make sure it all works and to map out the responses that we need to capture from our pipe here, I'm going to go back to my data builder and I'm just going to grab this IP address and use this as a search value. Go back to our pipe, into the filter by single field and over to the test tab, and then I can enter that value and perform the search. You can see we find one record, and you can see here is the value of the IP address, and here is the value of the radio field, which defines whether or not this particular IP is whitelisted or blacklisted. Okay, so now to map out my responses, I'm going to choose populate response, and then I'm going to expand the items array. And the only one I really want here is field 40, which if we go back and reference our initial test, field 40 stores the value of our IP address status. I'll disable all of these other things here, and then we will disable this one and just keep items.0.field underscore 40, and this will be IP status. Now that I've populated my responses, I can use that inside of my validation rule inside of my form. All right, we are done with the complicated stuff now. Now to some easier configurations to finish off this build. Inside the page builder, on the page that stores our form component, we are going to install a Tadabase plugin. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll find a plugins button. Click on that button in order to explore all of the available plugins that we have for this particular page. And I'm going to be using the Capture IP Address plugin here, and all I need to do is simply click Install, select the form component that I want to use, and then the text field to save the IP address into. So I've added my IP address field to the form component. I'm going to choose that field here, click Install, and the plugin is now installed. Switching over to our published application now and refreshing the page, you're going to see that we are now capturing the IP address as I load the page. Now there's two things that I'm still going to finish for this particular form component. Number one is I'm going to disable the IP address field so that we are logging it and capturing it, but not allowing anybody to edit it. And then the second thing is, of course, installing that validation rule and making sure that we are checking whether or not this IP address is currently whitelisted. Back inside the page builder, we're going to click to edit that form. Then we're going to click our IP address field and we're going to choose disabled/read only. This will prevent anybody from editing it while still being able to capture the particular IP value. Next, we'll go into rules and validation rules, and we will add a new validation rule with a pipe. It says filter by a single field. And the only thing we need to configure here is the filter value, which is going to come from the record value of the IP address. Next, using the response that we set up earlier, which is IP status, we can say if IP status is inactive, we can send a message saying, sorry, you are not authorized to submit this form. Update and save, and we're good to go. Going back to our published application, we'll of course refresh and give this a test. Number one, we can no longer edit this particular value. It's locked. When I try to submit this form, my IP is currently not whitelisted, so I'm going to see this message that says, sorry, you're not authorized to submit this form. If I go back into my data builder here and switch the value from blacklisted to whitelisted, now when I try to submit this again, because we are now whitelisted, the validation rule goes through fine, and I'm allowed to submit the form. All right, so that's it for today's episode of Build It with Tim. Hope you learned some cool things about IP security and the true power of Tadabase plugins and the crazy flexibility that we can do inside of a Tadabase application to control every aspect of security from A to Z. So thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Take care.